Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison Lagrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accuses the United States of withholding weapons supply to the Israeli military for operations in Gaza. Netanyahu says he turned down Washington's multiple requests to halt military activity in Gaza. Russian President Vladimir Putin to visit India. The Kremlin has confirmed the visit. However, official dates are yet to be announced. Putin last visited India in 2021. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. dials U.S. President-elect Donald Trump, calling the conversation very friendly and productive. This just a day after Washington and Manila sign a military intelligence agreement aimed at tracking China's movements. Somaliland's leader of opposition, Abdurrahman Mohamed Abdullahi, wins the presidential election. Abdullahi secures 64% of the vote after promising international recognition for the breakaway region. And Chad and Nigeria hold high-level talks to enhance security in the region. This after Chad's president criticized Nigeria for failing to crack down on Boko Haram terrorists who carried out deadly attacks on the Chadian army in October. Hello and welcome. Our top focus is on Sudan. The ongoing civil war in the country was at the center of a heated debate in the United Nations Security Council on Monday. The 15-member council voted to adopt a resolution calling for immediate ceasefire in the war-torn nation. Sudan is in the grip of a brutal civil war that started as a power struggle between the country's army, led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF, led by Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. 14 out of 15 members of the UNSC voted in favor of the resolution calling for a ceasefire, except for Russia. Russia, which is a permanent UNSC member, vetoed the draft resolution prepared by the United Kingdom and Sierra Leone. Even Russia's ally China voted in favor of the resolution. Russia's veto triggered a war of words at the Security Council. Russian envoy justified the veto by describing the resolution having post-colonial flavoring. He accused the UK of trying to avoid any mention of the legitimate authorities of Sudan. Britain, on the other hand, called Russia an enemy of peace. The British Foreign Secretary, in an angry response, said it is shameful how the Russian President Vladimir Putin is spreading conflict and violence in Africa.
We agree with all Security Council colleagues that the conflict in Sudan requires a swift resolution. It is also clear that the only way to achieve this is for the warring parties to agree to a ceasefire. We believe that the Security Council's role here is to help them to achieve this. However, this should be consistent and open and should not be done by imposing upon the Sudanese through a council decision the opinion of its individual members flavored with their post-colonial flavorings as to how the future country should be.
One country is the blocker. One country is the enemy of peace. This Russian veto is a disgrace, and it shows to the world yet again Russia's true colours. Shame on Putin for waging a war of aggression in Ukraine. Shame on Putin for using his mercenaries to spread conflict and violence across the African continent. And shame on Putin for pretending to be a partner of the global South while condemning black Africans to further killing, further rape, further starvation in a brutal war.
For the 19-month-long Sudan war. Prior to this, 3 resolutions have been adopted by the Council. The first one was passed in March, which called for ceasing hostilities during the holy month of Ramadan. Now, Russia was the only one to abstain. Second was a resolution adopted on the 13th of June, and that demanded the paramilitary RSF to halt siege of the city of Al-Fasher in Darfur region. Again, Russia was the only one to abstain. Now, the last resolution was adopted by the UNSC on the 11th of September, and that aimed to renew sanctions on the arms supplies on Sudan's Darfur region. This resolution was unanimously adopted. Now, these resolutions have had little impact on the ongoing conflict in Sudan. That continues to intensify despite the efforts for peace. So any positive impact from the latest resolution was also unlikely, even if it would not have been vetoed. However, it highlights how Russia could be viewing the war in Sudan. Russia has been reportedly hedging its bets by aiding both sides in the conflict. Earlier, it was reported that Russia's Wagner Group, now Africa Corps, was supporting the RSF. However, more recently, Russia has seemingly switched sides and is viewing the Sudanese army as a more strategic ally. Sudan's army is also reportedly backed by Iran, which is also Russia's partner. And the cooperation with the army will also allow Russia to counter Ukraine's influence in Sudan. So Russia's veto is signaling about which way Moscow is leaning. Sudan's army has welcomed Russia's veto at the Security Council. Now, Sudan's army-backed foreign ministry said it is viewing the gesture as support for the independence and unity of Sudan and its national institutions. Russia's veto has also been condemned by the United States. The U.S. President Joe Biden spoke about the Sudan war at the ongoing G20 summit in Brazil, where he urged external actors against arming Sudan generals.
Around Sudan, we're seeing one of the world's most serious humanitarian crises. 80 million people on the brink of famine. This deserves our collective outrage and our collective attention. External actors must stop arming generals and speak with one voice to tell them, stop tearing your country apart.
Interestingly, the development also coincides with the first visit of U.S. Special Envoy to Sudan. The U.S. envoy met Sudan's Army Chief General Burhan in Port Sudan. He discussed the flow of humanitarian aid and the need for a ceasefire in Sudan.
Share the aspiration for this war to end as soon as possible, to see an end to the horrific atrocities as we've seen recently in Jazeera State and elsewhere, and that we can continue to build to the aspirations of the Sudanese people to an inclusive democratic future.
Since April of 2023, over 24,000 lives have been lost and over 11 million have been displaced due to the war in Sudan. The conflict is reportedly being fueled with the involvement of foreign players. Sudan's army has accused the UAE of providing support to the RSF, while the RSF alleges countries like Iran and Egypt are backing the army. Now, reports have suggested that weapons linked to multiple nations are found in Sudan, and the efforts of brokering a peace deal led by the US and Saudi Arabia have failed. The warring parties have intensified their aggression in an attempt to seize more areas. Now, could the brutal fighting in Sudan see an end? How will the involvement of foreign players complicate the efforts? And now to discuss this further, we have with us Ben Aris, Editor-in-Chief of the B'nai IntelliNews and a political analyst. He is joining us live from Berlin. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure to be here.
Right, let's jump right in. What are the key reasons behind Russia's decision to veto the ceasefire resolution? And how do these reasons align with Moscow's broader geopolitical and strategic interests in Sudan and in the region?
I think the first and most obvious thing is that Moscow is interested in Sudan. Has been one of its friends, long-standing friends since Soviet times, and that the Kremlin continues to support that, and they want to keep Sudan as their close ally, if not, proxy in northern Africa. Consequently, they don't like meddling by the international community. But secondly, there's a wider point here, in so much as the UN is, passed this resolution, not the first one, calling for a ceasefire. But we've been down this road before, in so much as the UN also had a resolution that mandated NATO forces to support the rebels in Libya. And what happened then was that the Kremlin has this general principle of non-interference in sovereign states. And in the Libyan case, it objected to military action taken by NATO forces, taking sides in an internal conflict. But it decided to abstain. It was under a lot of pressure from the international community to bring an end to the fighting. But then that went disastrously wrong. Barack Obama admitted afterwards that it was a complete mess, that they failed to support the government, and the whole country is completely collapsed. Putin just gave him a speech at Valdai in Russia, where he was laying out his multipolar view of the world, and he has just met with Biden and made very similar points. And one of the principles of this emerging market world view on how the world should be run, the multipolar world, is non-interference in states. And so the Russians are taking the view that this is an internal problem, and of course, and then the ambassador to the UN said, of course, the fighting must be brought to an end. But what they're afraid of is that with a UN mandate, then that mandate would allow NATO forces to go in. And that's the last thing Russia wants to see NATO interfering in Africa, because it very much sees Africa as its backyard, as its protectorate, and they want to stop that.
Right, and Ben, given that Russia was the only member of the Security Council to vote against the measure, how does this impact Russia's diplomatic standing and its relations with both Western nations and African states?
Well, Russia has no international standing. It's a complete pariah since it invaded Ukraine, and so it really has nothing to lose at all from vetoing this and marking itself out, and alone in this issue. I mean, interestingly, China is also a permanent member of the Security Council, and in this particular case, normally China goes along with Russia, or at least abstains, and I think in this particular case, it didn't back Russia's objection to this. So it does look like it's isolated, but Russia is far away, far ahead of the West in terms of building relationships in Africa. The African continent as a whole have at least not condemned or not participated in the sanctions. And Putin has repeatedly, and again in his speech he just gave this week, talked about the colonialist attitudes of the West. And that plays extremely well in Africa. The Africans remember that with very, very bitter memory. And when you have the French and the Italians and the Germans marching around, and now the Americans marching around in Africa trying to revive relationships, And they've been met with very, very chilly receptions, whereas Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, is constantly in Africa, and he's welcomed wherever he goes, because the Russians don't come just with, words of friendship, and they didn't have colonies. They didn't colonize anything in Africa in Soviet Union times. But they come with nuclear technology, they come with commodities, they come with grain, they come with arms. And arms is a very important part of their relationship. And Sudan, I mean, as you said in your preamble, I mean, the Kremlin has been supplying arms to both sides, but it's been, when Omar al-Bashir was running the country until, was it 2019, that Russia was a major supplier of arms to Sudan, and it continues to be a major supplier. And that's very important for both regimes, competing regimes, to keep good relations with Russia. And again, UN interference, one of the things would be to cut those arms, that they fuel the conflict. But it's a diplomatic tool. Americans use it in the same way. It's a diplomatic tool. They often sell arms to both sides.
Right. Yes. Ben, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa and for your valued analysis and insights there.
My pleasure.
Let us now shift our focus to Rwanda, which has received a major boost to its operations in northern Mozambique. The European Council has agreed to provide Rwanda with an additional 20 million euros, or over $21 million, to help its deployment to fight terrorism in Mozambique's resource-rich Cabo Delgado province. In a press release on the 18th of November, the European Council said that the top-up funds would support Rwanda in firstly enabling the acquisition of personnel and equipment, and secondly to cover the cost related to strategic airlift needed to sustain Rwandan deployment in the Cabo Delgado region. Now, the European Council has previously financed a similar amount in December of 2022 to support the Rwandan Defense Forces, which have been deployed in Mozambique's Cabo Delgado province since July of 2021. Speaking about the importance of this additional funding, Joseph Borrell, the EU's representative for foreign affairs and security policy, noted that Rwanda's troops have been instrumental in making progress in the region. Now, he also noted that the top-up was testimony to the EU's support to African solutions for African problems. Now, Mozambique's northern province of Cabo Delgado has been grappling with an insurgency since 2017. Cabo Delgado province boasts Africa's largest gas reserves, while it's also home to the world's biggest ruby deposits. The insurgency in the province is rooted in anger over state corruption and opposition to the establishment of Islam. Additionally, some experts believe that the discovery of natural resources and the governance around them have to some extent also contributed to the conflict. Now, the insurgency is linked to the Islamic State, whose groups are locally known as Al-Shabaab, though they are not formally related to the better-known Al-Shabaab group in Somalia. Since the onset of the conflict, over 1.3 million internal displacements have been reported in northern Mozambique. Now, with the increase in insurgency activities in the region, several organizations have gotten involved in Mozambique to resolve this issue. The first one was the Southern African Development Community, or the SADC mission in Mozambique. The mission was deployed in the Cabo Delgado region in 2021. Now, it included troops from 8 countries, namely Angola, Botswana, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Lesotho, Malawi, South Africa, Tanzania, and Zambia. Now, the aim was to combat terrorism, to maintain peace and security, and to restore law and order in the affected areas. But financial constraints, lack of trust between the parties, and weak intelligence sharing, among other factors, led to the group's withdrawal from Mozambique in July of this year. Now, around the same time, in 2021, Mozambique also requested Rwanda's intervention to help it bring the situation under control. And this was parallel to the SADC mission in Mozambique. Now, Rwanda immediately deployed its defense forces and a police contingent to support the Mozambican operations. Currently, there are nearly 4,000 Rwandan troops deployed in Mozambique. Some of them were initially deployed to provide security in the Palma district, which was under attack from the insurgents following the development of an LNG project that was backed by a French company. Now, in addition to support from Rwanda, the Mozambican armed forces have also received training from the European Union with an aim of protecting the civilian population and restoring peace. Yet, despite the external support to Mozambique, insurgencies have increased in recent months in the northern province, leading to several people fleeing their homes in the region.
I am from Chur. I fled on February 20th. We do not have anything to eat, nor a place to sleep. We're suffering.
The Frelimo Party-dominated government has also assured during their election campaign before the October election to resolve the issues faced by the northern province.
For him, we will keep working for Mozambique to be a country of total and complete peace. For what concerns our brothers in Cabo Delgado, in the area of the terrorists, it's an attack to all of us Mozambicans.
However, post their victory following the polls on the 9th of October, the government has been facing crippling protests from opposition, which have called the election results rigged and not fair. And this has driven the government's attention away from the conflict in the north. While the Frelimo Party is busy clamping down on protesters, thousands of people in the north continue to suffer from the militancy as they eagerly await for a solution to the conflict and terror attacks. Now, you must have heard about kidnappers asking for ransom from a person. But have you ever heard of a country asking for ransom to release someone? Well, interestingly, that is just what Mali has done. In its latest, Australian company, Resolute Mining, has said that it would pay $160 million to Mali's ruling military junta in a bid to resolve a tax dispute after the company's chief executive officer, Terence Holohan, and 2 other executives were detained earlier this month in the West African country. The company has made an initial payment of $80 million from its existing cash reserves and will make future payments of about $80 million in the coming months. Resolute Mining also said in a statement published on their website that it had settled all the outstanding claims by the government against the company, including those related to tax, customs, maintenance and management of offshore accounts. Now, Terence Holohan has been the CEO and Managing Director of Resolute Mining since May of 2022. The British national has held various executive and technical mining positions, working in Africa for nearly 30 years. Earlier in November, Holohan and 2 other employees were detained in Mali's capital of Bamako as they were visiting the country for talks related to their business practices in Mali. Now, the government did not say why the 3 foreigners were unexpectedly detained, but reports suggest that the government detained them on charges of forgery and damaging public property as a way to blackmail the company amid its crackdown on foreign mining firms. Now, Resolute Mining has been working for years at Mali's Syama gold mine, which is a large-scale mining operation in the country's southwest region. The Australian company holds 80% stake in the mine, while the Malian government holds the remaining 20%. Ever since the double coups in 2020 and 2021, Mali's military junta has tried to reconfigure its political and trade relationships with the international partners. The junta has also been clamping down on foreign, mostly Western, mining companies in a bid to gain more shares of the gold mining reserves. Now, Mali is one of the leading gold producers in Africa. Gold contributes 1/4 of the national budget and 3/4 of export earnings. But the Sahel nation is also one of the poorest countries in the world. It has been embroiled in a political, security and economic crisis, and since 2012 has been battling Al-Qaeda and Islamic State armed groups. The country has relied more on its gold revenues as foreign aid has dwindled and the cost of operations increase for the government, especially with payments to be made to Russian mercenaries aiding the government. Thus, to effectively overturn the situation, the military-backed government brought in a new mining code last year, which gave a chance to increase the maximum stake for Mali and local investors from 20% to 35%. However, this is not the first time that Mali has detained foreign employees in its territory. In September, the company had detained 4 employees from Canadian company Barrick Gold for several days. Barrick Gold had to eventually reach an agreement with the government of Mali and pay $81 million in October to get them released. Now, while Australia's Resolute Mining has said that the CEO and the employees are safe and continue to receive support from the UK and international embassies, it is yet not known when the Malian government will officially release them. We will continue to get you more updates on this. Our final story is from Nigeria, where armed conflict and climate change are fueling alarming rates of malnutrition among children. The unfolding humanitarian crisis is worse for the ones most affected by floods in the Mubi region in recent months. New mothers are struggling as food shortages impact breastfeeding, and many children are staring at hunger and malnourishment. Our next story gets you all the details.
Inside the Mubi General Hospital, the scene is heartbreaking. Many mothers bring their malnourished children in search of critical care. The stabilization center is overwhelmed as more families arrive daily. Rabiatu Jibrila is one such mother in distress. She says her son was healthy at birth, but in the recent months, he began to lose weight. Now, he's battling for survival. Jibrila's son is not the only one. She says many children in her neighborhood are suffering a similar fate.
My son was healthy when I delivered him, but at 1 year 9 months old, I stopped breastfeeding him. He began to lose weight. We thought it was linked to him not being able to get breast milk. The doctor said he was malnourished and was giving injections and drugs. When I brought him, he couldn't even sit on his own. His stomach was flat. You would think he has no intestine inside his belly. We have other children at home. He is the only malnourished one amongst them, but I have seen other malnourished children in my neighborhood.
International non-profits note a troubling increase in malnutrition cases in Nigeria.
We are at the stabilization center in Mubi, and I can already tell you that since the last time I was here, the number of patients has increased drastically. If you compare June, July, August, and even September of 2023 to the same months of 2024, you will see that there are about 2 or 3 times the number of children admitted in the stabilization center.
Nigeria's crisis of food is linked to 2 factors. One is the armed conflict that has plagued the country's northeast. The second is the cycle of droughts and floods linked to climate change. Nigeria's northeast has seen some of its worst flooding in recent years. This, along with cycles of drought in other parts of the country, has aggravated the hunger crisis.
When we're looking at the numbers, the drastically increased numbers that we see in the stabilization center, OTP, and everywhere in the country, it's not only linked to the conflict that has plagued Nigeria for the last few years, but it's also linked to climate change. It's linked to the flooding that we've seen in the last few months, some of the worst flooding that Nigeria has experienced in the last few years.
In recent years, Nigerian farmers have lost vast areas of farmland either to floods or to the armed fighters. For the people living in areas like Mubi, Shua and Madagali, the impact has been even more severe. A 15-year insurgency by Boko Haram has killed over 40,000 people. Around 2 million people are left displaced due to conflict. Hit by this double whammy of armed conflict and natural disasters, the communities here are now struggling for food.
Surely, the effects of this will not be felt now, until next year. There will be food shortages and hunger in the coming months. We have people who fainted and are in hospital. Others are dead because there's no food to eat. Many people died because of this flood. They did not know what to do. They have lost hope.
We do not have enough farmlands because we used to go to the fields before the farm, but now the armed groups have taken over the bush. No one can go to the bush to farm anymore. We all scramble for the available farmlands around. The land is not sufficient for everyone. We just get small parcels just to ensure everyone has a portion to cultivate. We do not have big fields to cultivate.
Nigeria's crisis of food demands more attention from the world than it's currently getting. Let this be a reminder that zero hunger is still a top sustainable development goal. Communities in Nigeria's Mubi show that the world is still far from achieving this goal. The true scale of food crisis deep in the Nigerian hinterland is likely to be more severe. Tackling it all requires more resources, and the people of Nigeria are looking at the world for the redressal of this severe hunger crisis.
And that's it on the show for today. We'll see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.